It started with 4 words, not the ones you'd expect, not the ones that usually crack a life open and let the light flood in sideways. Not "I love you," which she said sometimes at bedtime, with the mechanical ease of a child who has learned that certain phrases function as passwords to the end of a conversation. Not "I need help," which she had never once said aloud in her 9 years of life, having intuited early that need was a currency her household could not always afford to trade in. Just 4 words, delivered from the doorway of his home office at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in October, in a voice so carefully flattened of expectation that it should have broken every window in the house. "Come fix this with me." She was wearing the oversized sleep shirt that had once been his, the one with the faded logo of a 5K he'd run 3 years ago when he still did things like run 5Ks. Her feet were bare on the hardwood. She had one hand on the doorframe and the other holding something he couldn't quite see, something small and apparently broken. And she stood there the way a person stands at the edge of a dock when they are not sure the water will hold them, not leaning in, not stepping forward, just waiting to see if the fall would be worth it. He was mid-sentence in an email. The cursor blinked at the end of an incomplete thought, some fragment about deliverables or timelines or whatever language people use when they are trying to make work sound more important than it is. The blue light of the screen had been his primary companion for the last 4 hours. His coffee had gone cold in the mug beside the keyboard. He had not eaten dinner. He had told her to heat up the leftover pasta, and she had eaten it alone at the kitchen table. And he knew this because he had heard the microwave and the scrape of a fork and then the water running in the sink, and he had noted each sound the way a man notes the weather from inside a building. Aware, unmoved, elsewhere. "Come fix this with me." She said it like a rehearsed line. That was the part that mattered. That was the part that should have detonated something in his chest, and did eventually, though not immediately, because the truth about moments that change everything is that they rarely announce themselves with the gravity they deserve. They show up in bare feet and borrowed shirts. They show up at 11 on a Tuesday. At some 11 badness. They show up in the voice of a child who has practiced her request in the mirror of her bedroom or in the silence of her own head and has already prepared for the most likely outcome, which is no, which is not now, which is the soft and devastating maybe later that children learn to translate fluently as never. She had braced for his refusal. That is the detail that matters more than any other detail in this story. A 9-year-old girl standing in a doorway at an hour when she should have been asleep, holding something broken, asking her father to come be her father, and she had already accounted for the probability that he would not. She had built his no into her expectations the way you build load-bearing walls into a house. It was structural. It was the architecture of her normal. And the thing about children who learn to expect refusal from the one person designed by biology and circumstance, and every implicit promise of parenthood to make refusal impossible, is that they are not just having a bad night. They are not just tired or dramatic or testing boundaries. They are reporting. They are delivering testimony about the shape of their daily life under oath to an audience of one. He looked up from the screen. The cursor kept blinking. She kept waiting. His name was David, and he had not slept more than 5 consecutive hours in 3 years. That number is not an exaggeration. It is not the kind of soft inflation people use when they want sympathy. 3 years. Since Mariana left. Since the apartment became his alone in the legal sense and entirely too much in every other sense. Since the morning he woke up and realized that the other side of the bed was not temporarily empty, but permanently so, and that the small person down the hall was now his sole responsibility, in a way that the word responsibility could not begin to hold. He worked in IT infrastructure for a regional hospital system. The pay was decent, not good. Decent in the way that meant the rent was covered and the grocery runs were possible, but the car repair was always a negotiation with a credit card he tried not to think about. He had been promoted once, 2 years ago, and the promotion came with a title change and a 7% raise and roughly 40% more work. And he had accepted it the way drowning people accept floating debris. Not with joy, with necessity. He was 34. He looked 41. Not because life had been cruel to his face, but because something behind his eyes had gone quiet in a way that ages a person from the inside. He still laughed. He still made his daughter's lunches with the crust cut off because she had once told him at age 6 that bread edges tasted like the color brown, and he had found that so disarmingly perfect that he could not bring himself to argue with it. He still showed up to parent-teacher conferences in a clean shirt. He still asked, "How was your day?" and meant it, at least in the beginning of the sentence before his attention slid sideways toward whatever work crisis was vibrating silently in his pocket. He was not a bad father. This has to be said plainly because the story that follows will make some people want to sort him into that category, and sorting is not understanding. He was a man who had absorbed an entire second person's share of parenting overnight and had no model for how to do it. His own father had been present in the way that fathers of a certain generation were present, which is to say physically in the house and emotionally behind a door that no one in the family had ever been given a key to. David had sworn he would be different. He had meant it. But meaning it and knowing how are not the same thing, and nobody had ever taught him the how, so he improvised. He kept the apartment clean, he monitored homework, he drove to soccer practice and sat in the parking lot answering emails on his phone and called that attendance. He made dinner most nights, even if most nights dinner was pasta with jarred sauce and a side of whatever vegetable she would tolerate, which was usually carrots and occasionally broccoli, if he called it tiny trees, and she was in a generous mood. He was, by every visible metric, managing. But managing is not the same as being present. And being present is not the same as being available. And being available is not the same as being the kind of safe that a child needs her only remaining parent to be. These are concentric circles that look identical from the outside and feel entirely different from within. His daughter knew the difference. She had known it for longer than he realized. Children are not fooled by the appearance of proximity. They are the world's most precise instruments for measuring the distance between a parent's body and a parent's attention, and they do not require any training to know when that distance has become too wide to cross alone. She had been measuring for months. And on that Tuesday night, standing in the doorway at an hour when she should have been asleep, she finally reported her findings. "Come fix this with me." 4 words. A puzzle on her bedroom floor, pieces scattered across the carpet like small cardboard teeth. That was the surface of it. That was the thing you could photograph, point to, explain to someone at a dinner party. My daughter had a puzzle she couldn't finish. She asked me to help. Simple. Except nothing about it was simple. And she knew that before he did. She had not said, "Come fix this for me." She had not said, "I need help." She had not even said, "The puzzle is too hard," which would have been the easiest door to walk through, the one that let him solve something from a distance, offer a suggestion over his shoulder, keep one eye on the screen while tossing her a strategy like a coin into a fountain. Wish granted. "Back to work," she said with me. That word carried the entire weight of what she actually needed, and it is worth sitting with for a moment, because children choose their words with a precision that adults have long since abandoned. Adults pad their language. They hedge. They soften and qualify and bury the ask inside 3 layers of politeness, so that rejection, if it comes, can be absorbed without too much damage. A 9-year-old has not yet learned that trick. A 9-year-old says exactly what she means, and then stands in a doorway at 11 o'clock at night waiting to find out if the world is the kind of place where meaning, what you say, gets you what you need. With me meant I want your presence, not your solution. With me meant I already know you can fix things from far away, and I am telling you that is not enough. With me meant the floor of my bedroom, your knees on the carpet, your hands next to my hands, your time not divided, your attention not borrowed but given. She was asking him to be in a room with her the way he used to be in rooms with her, before the laptop became a third parent, before his eyes developed that middle-distance gaze that meant he was composing emails in his head while she talked about school, before she learned to read the micro-expressions of distraction on his face and adjust her expectations downward, the way water finds its level. She was asking whether the two of them still constituted something, a unit, a pair, whether the word we still applied to their household, or whether it had quietly become two people living in the same space, orbiting the same kitchen table, sharing a last name and little else. And underneath even that, in the place where a child's logic operates with terrifying clarity, she was running an experiment. The kind children run constantly, without ever naming it as such. The hypothesis was brutal in its simplicity. If I ask for the smallest thing, if I make it easy, if I frame it as a project and not a feeling, if I come to him instead of waiting for him to come to me, if I do everything right, will he choose me? Will he choose me? That was the question she carried down the hallway in her pajamas, barefoot on the hardwood, puzzle box tucked under one arm. Not whether he loved her. She likely never doubted that, not in the abstract. Children of devoted but distracted parents rarely doubt the love. What they doubt is the priority. What they learn to question is whether love, if it never interrupts anything, if it never costs anything, if it never rearranges a single evening, is the kind of love that can actually hold them. She was not asking him to fix a puzzle. She was asking him to prove that she was not alone in her own home. And she had chosen 11 o'clock on a Tuesday to ask it, because that was the hour when his work finally went quiet enough that she thought she might be heard over it. She had waited for a gap in his noise. She had studied his patterns the way children study weather, looking for a break in the storm where she might slip through. Here is where the story bends away from the version you want it to be. Here is where it refuses to cooperate with the clean moral you were already assembling in your head. The one where a distracted father simply needs to put down his phone and pick up his child, and everything resolves into warmth and lesson learned. Because the laptop he was staring at when she appeared in the doorway was not a distraction. It was a lifeline. It was the thing standing between his daughter and the very different kind of doorway, the kind that leads to a relative's spare bedroom, to a shelter intake form, to the back seat of a car that has quietly become a home. He was not scrolling. He was not watching videos. He was not doing anything that could be filed neatly under the heading of parental negligence or misplaced priorities. He was working. And the work was for her. Every hour logged past midnight for the last 14 months had been for her. Every client email answered on a Sunday. Every freelance project accepted when his body was already running on caffeine and guilt. Every time he chose the screen over the story at bedtime, it was because he had done the math. He had looked at the numbers and the numbers had looked back at him with the same flat indifference that numbers always offer. And the numbers said that love without solvency is a beautiful idea that does not keep the lights on in January. So he had made a deal with himself, the kind of deal that exhausted people make in the dark. He told himself that presence was a luxury, and that provision was the foundation upon which presence would eventually be built. He told himself that once the freelance income stabilized, once the emergency fund existed, once the credit card balance stopped being a thing he could feel in his chest at 3 a.m, then he would be the father who sat on the floor. Then he would be the father who read the extra chapter. Then he would show up in all the soft and patient ways that parenting articles described, as though every parent had the same number of hours and the same depth of safety net. Then, that word he had tattooed on the inside of his planning, that word that moved like a horizon line, always exactly as far away as it had been the day before. And now his daughter was standing in the doorway, and she was not asking about the horizon. She was not interested in his 5-year plan or his debt-to-income ratio, or the elaborate architecture of sacrifice he had constructed and called love. She was asking for the thing the architecture was supposedly built to house. She was asking for him, right now, in his imperfect, unfinished, financially precarious present tense. This is the dilemma that single parents carry, and almost never get to articulate, because the world has already decided what their story is. Either they are heroes or they are failures. Either they are doing enough or they are not. The world does not leave much room for the truth, which is that sometimes the thing you are sacrificing for your child and the thing your child actually needs are not the same thing, and you cannot afford to choose, and you cannot afford not to, and the guilt of either direction is the kind that sits in your body like a second skeleton. He knew what she was asking. He was not oblivious. He was not the clueless father from a sitcom who needs a wise neighbor to explain that children spell love, T-I-M-E. He knew. He had always known. The knowing was not the problem. The knowing was, in fact, the thing that made every late night worse, because he carried it with him into every hour he spent working instead of parenting, a small bright wound that he could not stop touching and could not afford to heal. The dilemma was not work versus daughter. The dilemma was that he had been building a house for her out of hours he had stolen from her, and she was standing in the doorway of that house asking why it felt so empty inside. He closed the laptop, not dramatically, not with the kind of deliberate, cinematic slowness that signals a man who knows he's having a moment. There was no swelling music in his chest, no sudden clarity descending like light through cathedral glass. He just reached forward and pressed the screen down until it clicked against the keyboard. The way you close a book you've lost interest in. The way you shut a door you should have shut hours ago. The screen's blue glow vanished from his face. The room got darker. His daughter got clearer. She was still standing in the doorway, waiting. Not fidgeting, not repeating herself, not escalating the way children do when they think volume might accomplish what words couldn't. She was just standing there with the particular stillness of someone who has placed a bet and is watching the wheel spin. He pushed back from the desk. The chair wheels caught on the rug the way they always did. That small domestic friction he'd been meaning to fix for months. And he stood up, and he was taller than he remembered being, the way you feel taller when you stop hunching over something that's been making you small. He didn't say anything profound. He said something like, "Okay," or "show me," or "lead the way." The words themselves left no impression on either of them because the words were not the point. The standing up was the point. The following was the point. She turned and walked down the hall, and he walked behind her, and the hallway had never seemed so long or so ordinary. Past the bathroom with the dripping faucet, past the framed photos he stopped seeing years ago, past the thermostat he kept 2 degrees lower than comfortable because the bill last winter had frightened him in a way he couldn't explain to a 9-year-old. Every step was a small passage through the museum of his compromises, and she moved through it all without looking, because to her it was just the hallway, just the distance between asking and finding out if asking worked. Her room. The overhead light was on, which meant she'd been awake for a while, which meant the thing she needed fixed was not the thing that had woken her. The thing that had woken her was older than tonight. The broken object on her floor, whatever it was, some small plastic architecture of a toy or a project, or a thing she'd been building, was just the ambassador sent to negotiate on behalf of a much larger country. He sat down on the floor. His knees protested in the way that 37-year-old knees protest when they're asked to do something other than carry a man from desk to bed and back again. She sat across from him. Between them, the broken thing. Around them, the particular silence of a house after 11 at night when it's just 2 people and whatever honest thing is about to happen between them. She started explaining what was wrong with it. He started listening. Not the way he listened during the day, with half his mind already composing a response and the other half tracking the clock. He listened the way you listen when you've just closed something and haven't opened anything else yet. when there's a gap in the noise and the gap has your daughter's voice in it. He didn't fix it quickly. He could have. He could see the problem almost immediately, the way adults can see the problems that baffle children, the way the solution is obvious when you have 30 years on the puzzle. But he didn't reach for the quick fix because something in him, some instinct that exhaustion hadn't fully killed, understood that she hadn't asked him to fix it. She'd asked him to fix it with her. That word, that small, ordinary word in the middle of her sentence, was carrying the entire weight of what she needed. With, not for, with. So they sat on the floor and they were slow about it, and they were together about it, and the laptop stayed closed in the other room. Its work unfinished, its deadlines unmoved, the world outside this room continuing to demand things from him that he would eventually have to give. But not yet, not right now. Right now his hands were full. There is no grand theory of repair, no 12-step framework that maps the distance between a closed laptop and a rebuilt life. What exists instead is Tuesday, and then Wednesday, and then the Thursday after that, each one arriving with its own unremarkable demand, each one asking the same question his daughter had already asked in the doorway. Will you be here for this? He was. Not perfectly, not with the consistency of a man who had figured something out and now operated from a place of enlightened calm. He still worked late. He still felt the gravitational pull of the screen, the inbox, the endless machinery of keeping a household solvent on one income. There were nights he fell back into the old pattern, nights where his body occupied the couch while his attention lived somewhere inside a spreadsheet, and his daughter would look at him with that particular stillness children develop when they are measuring whether tonight is a safe night to ask for something. But something had shifted in the architecture of his attention. A door that had been painted shut was now cracked open, and the draft coming through it changed the temperature of everything. He started small, absurdly small, by any external measure. He began eating dinner at the table instead of at his desk. He asked her about her day, and then, this was the hard part, the part that required something closer to discipline than to instinct. He waited through the silence that followed. Because a child who has learned not to expect engagement does not suddenly become forthcoming. She tested him, not consciously, not with malice, but with the careful empiricism of someone who has been disappointed before and would like to gather more data before investing again. She gave him one-word answers for a week. Fine. Good. Nothing. The monosyllabic vocabulary of a kid who is watching to see if the new pattern holds, or if this is just another enthusiasm that burns bright, and then gutters out like every other promise adults make when they are feeling guilty, at 11 o'clock at night. He kept showing up to the table. On the 8th evening she told him about a boy at school who had said something cruel about her shoes, and the telling of it took 11 minutes, and in those 11 minutes he did not check his phone, did not offer a solution, did not try to fix it the way he fixed everything else in his life, by working harder and faster until the problem disappeared under the weight of effort. He just sat there. He let her be angry. He let the anger have its full, unedited shape in the room between them. She cried a little. He did not tell her not to. This is what revolution looks like when it happens inside a kitchen. No banners. No barricades. Just a man learning, at the speed of dinner, that presence is not a state you achieve, but a practice you return to every time you notice you have wandered away from it. He started walking her to school when his schedule allowed. Not every day, but enough days that she stopped being surprised by it. And that transition, from surprise to expectation, was itself a kind of healing he did not have language for. She began to assume he would be there. She began to take his presence for granted, in the way that children are supposed to take their parents' presence for granted, as the ground they walk on rather than a gift they must be grateful for. He did not become a different person. That is important to say. He remained tired. He remained stretched thin in ways that no amount of floor sitting or table dining could resolve. The bills did not become easier. The loneliness of solo parenthood did not evaporate because he had learned to put his phone in a drawer during homework hour. But his daughter stopped rehearsing for his refusal. And that, quiet, unmeasurable, invisible to anyone who was not paying the kind of attention he was only now learning to pay, that was everything. There is a silence that lives inside the homes of people who are doing it alone. It is not the silence of peace. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of a person who has no one to turn to at the end of the night and say, "Was that right? What I just did, was that enough? Am I ruining this?" That silence is its own kind of violence. And into that silence the world pours advice, relentlessly, gleefully, from every direction. The parenting books written by people with partners. The school systems designed around the assumption that two adults are managing the calendar. The social media posts from mothers and fathers who have the luxury of tagging each other in the labor, dividing the emergencies, sleeping in on alternating Saturdays, while someone else makes the pancakes. Single parents watch all of this from the other side of a glass wall. They absorb the advice. They measure themselves against the standard, and then they go back to the silence and sit with the distance between what is recommended and what is possible. So here is what they deserve to hear, and what no one says often enough, and what that father on the floor with his daughter needed someone to have said to him long before she appeared in the doorway at 11 on a Tuesday night. You are not failing because you are tired. You are not failing because the house is a mess, because dinner was cereal, because you lost your patience at homework time and raised your voice about something that did not warrant a raised voice and spent the next 2 hours sick with guilt about it. You are not failing because you cannot afford the summer camp or the therapist or the shoes that fit right. You are not failing because you cried in the car in the parking lot of the grocery store and then walked in and bought the groceries anyway. You are doing something that was never designed to be done by one person. The human species did not evolve for solitary parenting. For most of history, children were raised by groups, by extended families, by entire communities that shared the weight of keeping small people alive and teaching them what it meant to be human. The nuclear family was an experiment. The single-parent household is that experiment stripped to its most brutal minimum. And you are running it on fumes and still showing up. But here is the other thing you deserve to hear. And it is harder, and it will sting, and it is still said with love. Your exhaustion is real, your sacrifice is real, and your child still needs what your child needs. Both of those things are true at the same time. That is the cruelty of it. There is no amount of context that makes a child's unmet need less urgent. There is no explanation a 9-year-old can metabolize about why the parent is always behind the screen, always in the other room, always almost available, but never quite arriving. The reasons are legitimate. The reasons are survivable. The impact is still the impact. This is not a contradiction. This is the actual shape of the thing. And the way through it is not to work harder or sacrifice more, or optimize the schedule into some flawless machine of productivity and presence. The way through it is to do what he did, to hear the bid when it comes. To close the laptop, not because the work does not matter, but because the child standing in the doorway is telling you, in the only language she has, that the cost has gotten too high. You will not get this right every time. You will miss bids. You will choose wrong. You will look back on certain nights and wince. But the single parents who are paying attention, who are willing to be interrupted, who are honest enough to hear what their children are actually saying underneath the small requests, those parents are not failing. They are doing the hardest thing a person can do. And they are doing it without a net. Aha! That deserves to be said out loud into the silence, where someone might finally hear it. So here is what I want to say to you. If you are the person standing in the hallway right now, if you are the one with the laptop open and the child nearby and the box checked, if you are the one who has confused the scaffolding for the house, close it. Not tomorrow. Not after this email. Not when the quarter ends or the project ships or the promotion lands or the debt clears. Not then. Now. Because then is a lie you keep telling yourself. And your child has stopped believing it. And soon you will too. Except by that time the doorway will be empty and the hallway will be quiet, and you will sit there in the silence wondering when exactly the asking stopped. Children stop asking. That is the thing nobody warns you about. They do not escalate forever. They do not keep knocking louder and louder until you answer. They knock and they knock and they knock, and then one day they simply stop. And the silence that follows is not peace. It is not independence. It is not proof that they figured it out on their own. It is the sound of a child who has concluded, with the devastating logic available to small people, that they are not worth interrupting for. That conclusion will follow them into every classroom, every friendship, every relationship, every job interview, every mirror, every quiet room for the rest of their lives. And they will not know where it came from. They will just know it as a fact about themselves, the way they know their own name. Not worth interrupting for. Not worth the pause. Not worth the closing of the laptop. You think you are building something for them. You are. But they do not live in the future you are building. They live in the Tuesday night you are missing. They live in the 11 o'clock doorway. They live in the 3 seconds between their question and your answer. And in those 3 seconds, they are learning everything they will ever believe about whether love is something that shows up or something that sends money. Come fix this with me. She was not talking about the puzzle. She was not talking about the broken thing in her room. She was talking about the space between them, the gap that had opened up so gradually that he had mistaken it for normal, the distance that exhaustion builds when you are not watching. She was standing there with her hands open and her voice steady and her expectations low, and she was asking him to cross the hallway and sit on the floor and be a person with her. Not a provider, not a protector, not a hero, a person. Present and imperfect and there. And he did it. He closed the laptop and he got up and he walked down the hall. And he sat on the floor and he fixed the small broken thing. And in doing so, he fixed something much larger that neither of them had the vocabulary to name. That is not the end of the story. There is no end. He will open the laptop again tomorrow. He will get tired again. He will fall back into the pattern because patterns are patient and relentless, and they do not need your permission to return. But he will also remember the flaw. He will remember her face when he showed up. He will remember that the asking is a gift, that every time she stands in that doorway, she is telling him she still believes he might come. And that belief is not infinite, and he cannot afford to waste it. So come fix this with me. That is what your child is saying. That is what your life is saying. That is what every important thing you have ever neglected is saying to you right now in whatever doorway it is standing in, at whatever hour it has finally gathered the courage to ask. The laptop will wait. The hallway will not.